Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about the early civilization of ancient China, including the Zhou dynasty, the Shang dynasty, the Zhou dynasty, and the Warring State period, and the Han dynasty. Well, that's a lot, but this is my most familiar history, also my specialty. This is the chronology of these early civilizations in China, including Shang dynasty, Zhou dynasty, Warring states, and then Qin and Han. But I want to emphasize this period, 550 to 400 BCE, because most of the major religions, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, the two important Indian epics were developed during this time. And this is, like the golden age of early Asian civilizations. Now let's look at the map of China. So Chinese civilization arose largely independent of contact with or influences from other areas, and early developed its own distinctive form and style because of its geographical situation. China was effectively isolated by high mountains and deserts along its northwestern, western, and southwestern borders, and by the friction of distance across the great breadth of arid Central Asia. So here we can see the high mountains close to the north border. Here's the Gobi Desert and Taklamakan Desert. And here is the plateau of Tibet and Himalaya mountains. Northward lay the desert and steppe of Mongolia, and the subarctic lands of Siberia and northern Manchuria, in part because of its isolation until recent centuries. The Chinese civilized tradition was more continuous, coherent, and slow to change over a long time period than any other in history. Interaction was much easier with areas to the east and south, and the model of Chinese civilization spread later to Korea, Vietnam, and Japan, where it still forms a basic part of the literate cultures of those areas. So East Asia as a whole is accordingly sometimes called the Sinic culture. So Sinic is from the Latin word for China or Chinese. The Sinic culture also inherited most of the traditional Chinese agriculture system, as well as its systems of writing, philosophy, literature, political and social institutions, and art forms. This diffusion took place, however, only 2,000 years or more after Chinese civilization first began, and after the establishment of the First Empire in the 3rd century BCE. The empire discarded some elements developed in earlier centuries and added others to create the model of imperial Chinese culture. This imperial Chinese culture subsequently spread to the rest of East Asia. Long before the beginning of the Christian era in the West, China had already produced one of the world's major civilized traditions, and the model of the Han dynasty was to be reaffirmed by successive Chinese dynasties for the next 2,000 years. Oh, by the way, so the Chinese writing system is still in use. Now let's turn to the two early dynasties of Chinese civilization, Shang and Zhou dynasty. Someone probably will tell me that, no, you're not right. There is another dynasty, the Xia dynasty. But the Xia dynasty was not yet confirmed archaeologically. According to the legends, the last Xia king was an oppressive, terrible king who lost his realm to the founder of the Shang dynasty. In fact, the Xia state did not entirely collapse, and did not disappear so much as it gave way gradually before the Shang. So Shang arose in a region to the south and east of the Xia realm. Tradition assigns the Shang dynasty to the period from 1600 to 1050 BCE. And archaeological discoveries have largely confirmed those dates because the Shang dynasty left written records as well as material remains, the basic features of early Chinese society come into much clearer focus than they did during the Xia dynasty. So probably the Xia dynasty was just a stage in a very early stage. Okay, here I want to talk a little bit about the food of the Shang dynasty. The chief crop of Shang China, and for many centuries later, was not wheat, but millet, probably an indigenous grain. So I showed you the picture of millet in session 2. So if you are listening to the lecture now, please send me an email of the main food in the Shang dynasty. That would be a bonus pop quiz. The Shang dynasty made great achievement on bronze metallurgy and horse-drawn chariots. Technology helps us to explain the rise and success of the Shang dynasty. Bronze metallurgy transformed Chinese society during the Shang times, and indeed may well have enabled Shang rulers to displace the Xia dynasty. Bronze metallurgy went to China from Southwest Asia, together with horses, horse-drawn chariots, carts, wagons, and other wheeled vehicles. This collection of related technologies traveled to China as well as India with the early Indo-European migrants. These migrants made their way to the Tarim Basin, this region, Xinjiang province, as early as 2000 BCE. Early Chinese chariots were close copies of Indo-European chariots from the Uranian plateau, and ancient Chinese words for wheels, spokes, and chariots all derived from Indo-European roots. Bronze metallurgy reached China before the Shang dynasty. So here are two very important, very famous artwork of bronze metallurgy of the Shang dynasty. This is probably a container, but only for the elites using in like grand rituals. And this is a mask. I don't know what it's used for. And then it's the Shang political organization. The Shang rulers did not rule a highly centralized state. Rather, their authority rested on a vast network of walled towns whose local rulers recognized the authority of the Shang kings. During the course of the dynasty, Shang kings may have controlled 1,000 or more towns. Apart from local rulers of those towns, others who shared the agriculture surplus of Shang China included advisors, ministers, craftsmen, and metalsmiths. Uh, these people, in their various ways, helped Shang rulers shape policy or spread their influence throughout their realm. The first capital of the Shang dynasty was Ao, and then it moved to Yin in today's Anyang, the Henan province. Okay, now let's look at the Zhou dynasty. So according to the Zhou accounts, the last Shang king was a criminal fool who gave himself over to wine, women, tyranny, and greed. As a result, many of the towns and political districts subject to the Shang transferred their loyalties to the Zhou. After several unsuccessful attempts to discipline the Shang king, Zhou forces seized the Shang capital of Yin, beheaded the king, and replaced his administration with their own state in 1050 BCE. The new rulers allowed Shang heirs to continue governing small districts, but reserved for themselves the right to oversee affairs throughout the realm. The new dynasty ruled most of northern and central China, at least nominally, until 250 BCE. Or 256 BCE. Also here we notice a pattern. The last king of the Xia dynasty, well in legends, the last king, the last emperor of the Shang dynasty. Both of them were terrible people. That's the reason they were only through. So here I'm going to introduce a new concept, mandate of heaven, to understand the changes of different dynasties in the following 2,000 years. In justifying the deposition of the Shang, spokesmen for the Zhou dynasty articulated a set of principles that have influenced Chinese thinking about government and political legitimacy over the long term. The Zhou theory of politics rested on the assumption that earthly events were closely related to the heavenly affairs. More specifically, heavenly powers granted the right to govern, the mandate of heaven, to an especially deserving individual known as the Son of Heaven, the Emperor. The rulers then served as a link between heaven and earth. He had the duty to govern mercifully, observe high standards of honor and justice, and maintain order and harmony within his realm. As long as he did so, the heavenly powers would approve of his work. The cosmos would enjoy a harmonious and well-balanced stability, and the ruling dynasty would retain this mandate to govern. If a ruler failed in his duties, however, chaos and sufferings would afflict his realm. The cosmos would fall out of balance, and the displeased heavenly powers would withdraw the mandate to rule and transfer it to a more deserving candidate. On the basis of that reasoning, spokesmen for the new dynasty explained the fall of the Shang and the transfer of the mandate of heaven to the Zhou. From that time until the 20th century CE, Chinese ruling houses routinely invoked the doctrine of the mandate of heaven to justify their rule, and emperors habitually took the title Son of Heaven. Now let's talk about the political organization. The Zhou state was much larger than the Shang. So here is the map. In fact, it was very expensive that a single central court could not rule the entire land effectively, at least not with the transportation and communication technologies available during the second and first millennia BCE. As a result, Zhou rulers relied on a decentralized administration. They entrusted power, authority, and responsibility to subordinates who in return owed allegiance, tribute, and military support to the central government. So during the early days of the dynasty, the system worked reasonably well. The conquerors continued to rule the Zhou ancestral homeland from their capital, but they allotted possessions in conquered territories to relatives and other allies. The subordinates ruled their territories with limited supervision from the central government. In return for their political rights, they visited the Zhou royal court on specified occasions to demonstrate their continued loyalty to the dynasty. They delivered taxes and tribute that accounted for the major part of Zhou finances, and they provided military forces that the king developed in the interests of the Zhou state as a whole. When not already related to their subordinates, the Zhou rulers sought to arrange marriages that would strengthen their ties to their political allies. Another great achievement is during this period was China's writing system. As I said before, the Chinese culture was more continuous and coherent. One example is the writing system. I'm not going to talk about the writing system here, but I provide a documentary of Oracle Bones on UB Learns. Now let's pay attention to the warring states. So this period was in search of political and social order. The late centuries of the Zhou dynasty brought political confusion to China and led eventually to the chaos associated with the period of the warring states. During those centuries, however, there also took place a remarkable cultural flowering that left a permanent mark on Chinese history. In a way, political turmoil helps to explain the cultural creativity of the late Zhou dynasty and the period of the warring states, because it forced thoughtful people to reflect on the nature of society and the proper roles of human beings in society. So we already learned Confucianism and Taoism. Some sought identify principles that would restore political and social order, like the Confucianism. Others concerned themselves with a search for individual tranquility apart from society, which is Taoism. So today we are going to talk about another school, the legalism. The legalism exercised all the three schools exercised a particular deep influence on Chinese political and cultural traditions. So I can emphasize again, for individual, Confucianism emphasizes the importance of being a benevolent, good person, a gentleman, 君子. And Taoism is more about maintaining the harmony and balance of humans inside, like this yin and yang picture. And legalism, as you can see from the picture, is more about using harsh penalties to scare people. The legalists, there are some important philosophers of legalism. One is Sheng Yang. So the legalists expected to harness subjects' energy by means of clear and strict laws, hence the name legalist. Their faith in laws distinguished the legalists clearly from the Confucians, who relied on ritual, custom, education, a sense of propriety, and the humane example of benevolent Jun's administrators to induce individuals to behave appropriately. The legalists believed that those influences were not powerful enough to persuade subjects to subordinate their self-interest to the needs of the state. They imposed a strict legal regimen that clearly outlined expectations and provided severe punishment, swiftly administered for violators. They believed that if people feared to commit small crimes, they would hesitate all the more before committing great crimes. Thus, legalists imposed harsh penalties even for minor infractions. For instance, individuals could suffer amputation of their hands or feet for disposing of ashes or trash in the street. The legalists also established the principle of collective responsibility. Before the law, they expected all members of a family or community or village to observe the others closely, forestall any illegal activity, and report any infractions. Fulfilling those obligations, all members of a family or community or village were liable to punishment, along with the actual violator. The legalists' principles of government did not win them much popularity. Over the course of the centuries, Chinese moral and political philosophers have had little praise for the legalists, and few have openly associated themselves with the legalist school. Yet legalist doctrine lent itself readily to practical application. The legalist principles of government quickly produced remarkable results for the rulers who adopted them. In fact, legalist method put an end to the period of the warring states and brought about the unification of China, which is the Qin dynasty. Now let's look at the kingdom of Qin. During the 4th and 3rd centuries BCE, the Qin state underwent a remarkable round of economic, political, and military development. Sheng Yang, the person I mentioned in the previous slide, the philosopher of legalism, he encouraged the peasant cultivators to migrate to the sparsely populated state. By granting them private plots and allowing them to enjoy generous profits, his policy dramatically boosted agriculture production. And also remember, the legalists believed that agriculture and military force were the foundations of an empire. By granting land rights to individual cultivators, his policy also weakened the economic position of the hereditary aristocratic classes. That approach allowed the Qin rulers to establish centralized bureaucratic rule throughout their state. Meanwhile, they devoted the newfound wealth of their state to the organization of a powerful army equipped with the most effective iron weapons available. So during the 3rd century BCE, the kingdom of Qin gradually but consistently grew at the expense of the other Chinese states. Qin rulers attacked one state after another, absorbing each new conquest into their centralized structure, until finally they had bought China for the first time under the sway of one single state. The founder of the Qin dynasty was Qin Shi Huangdi. In the year 221 BCE, the king of Qin, Qin Shi Huangdi, proclaimed himself the first emperor and decreed that his descendants would follow him and rule for thousands of generations. Unfortunately, they only ruled for like 200 years. Like his ancestors in the kingdom of Qin, the first emperor of China ignored the nobility and ruled his empires through a centralized bureaucracy. He governed from his capital at Xianyang. Here, Xianyang, you can see, is also close to the Yellow River Valley, the origin of Chinese culture. So Qin Shi Huangdi, he was a very interesting person. He adopted legalism and united China. He had some hobbies. First is building the Great Wall against the North nomadic people. Second is the burning of the books. It is likely that many Chinese welcomed the political stability introduced by the Qin dynasty, but by no means did the new regime win universal acceptance. So Confucians, Taoists, and others launched a vigorous campaign of criticism. In an effort to reassert his authority, Qin Shi Huangdi ordered killings for those who criticized his regime, and he demanded the burning of all books of philosophy, ethics, history, and literature. His decree exempted works on medicine, fortune-telling, and agriculture on the grounds that they had some utilitarian value. And the third thing is his tomb. Qin Shi Huangdi died in 210 BCE. His final resting place was a lavish tomb, constructed by some 700,000 drafted liberals as a permanent monument to the first emperor. Rare and expensive grave goods accompanied the emperor in burial, along with sacrificed slaves, concubines, and many of the craftsmen who designed and built the tomb. But the most amazing thing of his tomb is the terracotta warriors. I also provide a documentary of the technology of making the terracotta warriors on UB Learns. So generally speaking, Qin Shi Huangdi, he liked building the Great Wall to keep the state isolated from other states. And he did not like literature or philosophy. He disliked people's criticism very much. I mean, all the two characteristics reminded me a current president, right? So I did not talk about, I'm not going to talk about the Han Dynasty today. I will leave that session to the class of the Silk Road. Thank you very much for listening to the lecture on Chinese civilization today.